FM Weather Update.
Welcome back to Sparks FM. I hope you're staying safe out there in this wild weather. Strong winds are continuing to affect southern Sunset City and the Seminole Keys with some flooding around the swampland area and surrounding suburbs. But good news is that the storm conditions are predicted to ease as early as tomorrow morning, coincidentally on the 20-year anniversary of Hurricane Susan. A stark reminder of just how severe storms can truly be.
G'day, welcome back to Sunset City. I always find it really fascinating to see just how cities repurpose or don't repurpose old or abandoned train lines. We're going to explore this idea by working on a massive stretch of old train line that stretches all the way from the city down to the Seminole Keys, and then at the end of the episode, I'm going to head back into the city and abandon a train line. Yeah, that's right. It's going to make way for a future build in the next episode, so if you think you know which line I'm talking about, do let me know and we'll see if you're right at the end of this one. But like I said, it is always fascinating to see just how cities reuse and repurpose, or don't repurpose, these abandoned train lines. A well-known example is the High Line in Manhattan, which is an old elevated freight line that connected up some of the industry in Manhattan, but now it serves as a city park, with a good chunk of the line now pedestrianised with plants and benches and places just to chill out and take in some of the city views. We've got a low budget version of this in my hometown of Sydney. It's not quite as long, it's not quite as grand, but it's still pretty nice, a nice little place to walk and hang out. And then the rest of that train line in Sydney actually turns into a light rail. It's actually used as the light rail infrastructure, which was a great way to, cut costs, connect up parts of the city, and also use some of that pre-existing infrastructure. If you look close enough, you can kind of spot the old cargo lines in Los Angeles. They're covered up with car parks and houses and any sort of new development. But if you look closely, you can see the old path, and it's kind of fascinating. Of course, there are plenty of examples all around the world. Every city has got some sort of old train infrastructure, whether it's been reused or it's just left to rot. I always find this really interesting, and if you've got something in your hometown, do let me know because it's always interesting to find out. For this build though, we are taking inspiration from the massive train line that was built from Key West all the way up to Miami and beyond. The train line didn't operate for very long. It only operated from 1912 to 1935. It was damaged in the Labor Day hurricane and never reopened as a functioning train line. But a lot of the infrastructure still exists today. A lot of the old bridges, a lot of the old bits and pieces left behind, either repurposed or rotting and fading away into the ocean. A lot of people got in touch and mentioned that I should do something similar in Sunset City. You guys know me too well. This is exactly the sort of thing that I'm interested in. We're starting the build process at Santa Julia, which is the first island of the Seminole Keys. This is a big stretch of bridge that is connecting up the mainland to Santa Julia. I wanted to drag out the network of the train line first, just to get a bit of a sense of where that line is going to go and where it's going to be most realistically connected up. Using the islands as a bit of a stepping stone across the bay, as it is a pretty big stretch and you want to use as much of the high ground as possible, less infrastructure down below into the ocean, and just using those islands as a bit of an easy way of stepping across that bay. There's a good example of this towards Key West where you can see the old bridge and the new bridge, they kind of part ways for a bit. With the old bridge taking more the route where the islands and the higher ground are sitting, but then the new bridge is taking more of the faster route. I guess using all that brand new fancy technology, you can kind of just cut through that area a little bit faster. I decided to take this idea by reshuffling around some of the bridges, making it so that the old bridge was taking more of the high ground, using some of the islands as a bit of a stepping stone, and changing so that the bridges kind of went in a little bit of a different direction. Same direction, but taking a slightly different route. Someone mentioned that it'd be cool just to have the pillars remaining in some of these areas, which I think is a really great way of showing how the bridge has collapsed over time. And this is an area that I'm not really going to use as repurposing. We're not going to really use any of this infrastructure. We'll use parts of it, but this big stretch doesn't really need to be reused for anything else. So it's kind of just been left to rot and fall into the ocean. I also want to show that some areas were still somewhat intact, and they were intact because maybe they were better looked after, or maybe there was stronger infrastructure there, or maybe the weathering around these areas just weren't quite as severe as some of the other spots. You know, around the middle of these bridges, that's where you're more likely to have some of these collapses, because I think that's where the stronger forces from the wind or even from the waves are going to affect those areas even more. I'm using a bit of a combination of pedestrian pathway but then also the train line just to show that there are different types of textures and colors, and the wear and tear on this bridge has definitely shown on different segments, because using the combination of those different types of segments, it kind of shows that some parts of the bridge are kind of collapsing, some parts have been refurbished, and other places are completely disappeared. And then this little segment here, because we are so close to Santa Julia, we wanted to turn this area into a fishing pier, because a lot of people are letting me know that there are segments of the old bridge that are now being turned into popular fishing destinations, which totally makes sense. I think this would be an excellent spot to go and fish. It'd actually be a lot of fun fishing on the edge of an old rail bridge. And I wanted to just drag out a pedestrian pathway through here, but then try and figure out how I'm going to get people to actually use it. That's the real question. I mean, I don't think I can get people to go to the very end of this thing. I don't know if I can place park spawners around there either, so I don't know. If you guys got any ideas, let me know. But then I just wanted to detail it up, just adding in a bit of a playground and just making the trees around this little segment just super nice and very pretty. And then this little island that we have the two bridges meet at, I figured that this would be a good spot to encourage some people to go camping, and maybe have a bit of a road that allows for some RVs to get through. Maybe even the segments of the bridge can also allow for some places for people to pop their boats into, maybe like a little boat ramp. This would definitely be a great little getaway for anyone up at Sunset City, just wants to do, a couple of little nights just on the edge of the Seminole Keys. This is a great little fishing spot and also a little bit secluded. I kind of like it. I have to admit, I got pretty carried away with the detail work on some of the trees on this island. Really getting into the nooks and crannies around the road, I think just adds so much when you just add a huge variety of different types of trees, but then also making sure there's lots of different types of tropical trees like these palms, and even these little bushes and just little pockets of foliage, I think just adds so much. And then even just going through and roughing up the ground, just because, sometimes you forget that this is a pretty wild space. There's going to be a lot of tree litter and lots of dirt, so making sure that I roughed up that surface just a little bit. And of course, I've got to add some cheeky little fishermen just at the end of this pier. These are some fisherman props made by Sven. They look amazing. They really add to the atmosphere on the edge of this pier. And speaking of which, we've got to have some wildlife as well, so adding in some pelicans in just some absolute classic pelican locations at the end of a pier, waiting for those fish. Perfect. And then I really love this little addition next to the pillar, just have this shark circling that. I really love adding in all this wildlife, particularly around areas that are just out of the city, they just feel a little bit more wild. And of course, you have to zoom in and get real close to really notice all that, but I just really love it. I just think it really adds to so much of the atmosphere within these more wild locations. Now, in true Tudor style, I was spending a little extra time than I expected on the details that I didn't really anticipate building in the first place. So I was having a look at the islands that stretch towards our Key West and thinking, well, what's that going to look like? How is this train line going to interact with this area and make it feel like it's not so cramped, because it is a much smaller spot, as you can probably tell. So I figured, let's just work on this little area here, because this would be maybe even the final spot where the train line was going to go across. Perhaps the train line was going to share the same infrastructure as the new bridge that maybe is going over that old infrastructure. I don't know. I'm going to put it to you guys, because I don't really want to have two bridges potentially going in the same location over what is a much smaller area of land. It's not a huge amount of space, and I think if we have two bridges, it might make things feel a little bit crowded. But for this area right here, I did want to add in an extra little bit of that rail infrastructure by placing out this pedestrian pathway and then also placing my own pillars. These are some wooden pillars that I think look pretty cool. But I really just wanted to reference these areas that have the two parallel bridges, the new and the old, with the old bridge now a pedestrian pathway, and it's just this excellent looking spot, and there's quite a lot of different areas that have this, so I wanted to just at least have one spot in the Seminole Keys that was at least referenced to that. But what were we going to turn this island into? What was it going to be all about? Well, I figured that with the announcement of the new DLC, Hotels and Resorts, I think it'd be kind of nice to add a bunch of those new features onto this island, turning this place into a bit of a tourist destination. So I'm going to put it to you guys, what sort of things would you expect over here? What sort of things do you think we can add? I don't even really know what the DLC is about, so it'd be kind of fun to explore it. I figured I'd kick things off with this excellent hotel, and then I wanted to name the place La Gloria, which is this excellent asset that I found on the Steam Workshop. I raised it up ever so slightly so that people can actually walk and cycle underneath using that pathway, which was kind of a fun little accident. And I've also been meaning to name a place in tribute to Gloria Estefan, so La Gloria is my tribute to Gloria, so there we go. I think that's a nice little fit there. But I do look forward to returning to this little island, building it up and figuring out what the bits and pieces of that DLC are all about. If you've got any ideas, please hit me up, and how on earth are we going to get people here, because it's kind of remote. Before we return to the city, I wanted to change the network on the ferry line because you could see the buoys and they were really frustrating me even though I had changed the settings on hide it. So I decided to just remove them by switching out the network to a one-way version of the network, which got rid of it. And with that, it was time to leave paradise and get back to the city. There were still quite a lot of things to do up there. Some things that I kind of left undone. Returning to our harbour that we built last episode, I felt like I'd done Mike Burgundy dirty. There was meant to be a King Buns up here, but there wasn't, so we had to fix that. All the other King Buns around the city were standalone drive-through restaurants, but I felt like that wouldn't work up at a harbour because we're going to have more foot traffic as we had a lot of people who were catching buses and were jumping on ferries. There were not that many drivers, so I felt like I needed to place something within the structure of this actual harbour. So what I'm doing here is I'm dragging in a vanilla building that looks pretty good for a fast food joint. I'm using the procedural objects mod to remove the signs on the side of this building and then slapping a couple of King Buns logos on the side of it and pretty much calling it a day. It's amazing what just a couple of signs would do to the look of some of these vanilla buildings. 2015, this game came out, and some of these buildings don't look so bad, especially when you dress them up with some props. And then I am placing down a couple of extra buildings within the side of our harbour, just to make it look like it's a little more blended in, some shops underneath it. Unfortunately though, it's as good as putting lipstick on a pig because absolutely no one is going inside it, and instead they're jumping on buses to go into Sunset City and find some real food. I decided to take this opportunity and follow the crowd to fix up a little bit of the bus network. Of course, the majority of people were getting off at the train station, which was causing some problems because the infrastructure wasn't really there, and we also had quite a lot of people arriving by train, so we needed to make some changes. Someone mentioned a while back that it'd be a good idea to include some sort of intercity bus station next to the central station. This is a great idea. I probably should have done this a while back. The question is, whereabouts were we going to build this thing? I wanted to build it on an area that wasn't going to trample over anything too important. Didn't want to go over any residential, didn't want to go over any of the offices. So I figured that this little spot here that was a little bit of a park, but a very under-detailed park, this would be a good spot right next to the freeway and close enough to the central station so that it made it easy enough for people to transfer. We'll work on that in a second. The tricky thing was just making this thing fit. It was just a little bit too big. I had to shuffle around a little bit of the network of the highway just so that our ramp could be tucked underneath the elevated section so that we had a little bit of extra space for that station. And then it was just a matter of connecting it back up and making it so that we had enough space for vehicles going at somewhat high speeds to actually enter into that ramp. I'm not calling this the most safest entrance. Maybe we can just blame the 80s again. I'm sure I can just keep on using that as an excuse, but it's there. People are able to access the ramp still, but it's just a little tight. You know, I see cities do this every now and again. It's fine. It'll be fine. With our bus station now nested in up there, I wanted to connect up our bus line, but I didn't want it to replace any of the bus stops directly in front of Central Station. I just wanted it to be an additional stop. This is so that people can transfer up there, but if you wanted to go directly in front of our Central Station, you could still do that. But unfortunately at this stage, I couldn't figure out why I couldn't place a stop directly in front of Central Station. I realized that I actually had to drag out the nodes because a bus stop will only go on a segment between 2 nodes. So by dragging that out, I was then able to change where the stop actually sat. I had to place an extra node so that I was able to get it directly in front. I felt like this was a much safer and much better spot for a bus stop directly in front of Central Station. People can actually go directly into it. And then there was just a little bit more space between the car park. Still a car park there, but people had a little bit more space rather than being, you know, maybe like a couple of meters away. I placed down a couple of bus stops for decoration, but I wanted to draw my attention to the real focus of this. I wanted to get people to that bus station. How are we going to get people there? Well, someone did mention that why don't I build some sort of pedestrian pathway over the top. When I first built the Central Station, we spoke about how it's pretty flawed. It's got some real design flaws, and you know, maybe some sort of overpass was going to fix some of those problems. Keywords, some of them. What I really wanted to do was I wanted to make it so that people could access this footbridge either from the street or from the platform on the Central Station, but I felt like doing it like this just made it sort of like unnecessary infrastructure. You know, they wouldn't pay for 2 ramps like this, they would just pay for the one that connected up to both of them. So I decided to make one that just goes down in the middle and then it branches off so that you can actually access this area whether you're on the street or whether or not you're on the platform. And I felt like this worked a whole lot better. This is an excellent footbridge that's made by Cluse, and I mean, as great as it is, I really struggled with trying to fit it into this area. This is nothing on Cluse, this is purely on my own, trying to make something fit in such a tight little spot, and then also make it so that it was more of a ramp than stairs, and then making it so that the network connected up to both these areas. It was a little bit of a tricky, bit of a stretch, but I think by using a bunch of mods like the node controller and by just dragging things out using Move It, I think that this kind of worked pretty well, and I dare say I'm gonna continue using it. Like, we're not gonna replace this footbridge because I think that we'll probably end up using this when we add some sort of metro. You can connect directly up to that as well, which I think would be super nice. As always, it is satisfying seeing so many people use your infrastructure, especially when you spend so much time on it. However, on the other side of this, people were kind of using the roads a little bit strangely. I'm sure extending out the footbridge will solve this, but for now, we're just gonna leave it. We'll get back to it in a little while. There is one more thing that we still need to do. A few months ago now, I spent many hours building the grand and the fabulous Fab Arena. I used to sit here because I pretty much deleted it the next episode. Very controversial episode. People were not happy about that. What stands in its place now? Well, this ore factory. The Hemlock Ore Group have been in Sunset City for many years now, but have not been performing very well. With the city expanding, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for a factory of this size being so close to downtown. And in fact, other industries within this area have also relocated to places outside of the city. Once upon a time, factories of this size made a lot of sense closer to the downtown. This was closer to train lines, there were docks around here, and now that the city is becoming more desirable and people wanted to live closer to the city, a place like this, a factory, an eyesore, sitting on a location like this doesn't make any sense. So it has slowly become abandoned and being reclaimed by nature. Until now, because this is also a prime location for an event. Something big is coming to Sunset City, and it's not just Fab Arena. In fact, it's kind of not Fab Arena. It's kind of Fab Arena, but it's also kind of not. What do you think I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about. Thank you guys so much for watching today's episode of Sunset City. Hope you've enjoyed it. Next week's episode, well, it's going to be a big old chunky one. I really can't wait to build it. It's going to be a lot of fun. A big shout out to Philip Winkinson, Ben0013, Adam, Christopher Harrison, Jake Rosser, Tjorvins, Edward Ritchie, Matthew Harrison, Eckhart's Ladder, Ricardo Scaparo, Yobert, Tony Perrick, and Sam from STL. Thank you, legends, for your support over on Patreon, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.